an ambitious international climate agreement, what do you think are the three most important components that need to be included in that agreement?
Well, I think we'll come back to these, but the three most important ingredients are basically mitigation, the level of targets for the developing and developed world. Secondly, an approach to adaptation, and thirdly, I would say an approach to finance. Those are the three essential ingredients of a full agreement at Copenhagen. In terms of the level of ambition, to respond to your question, and the most desirable outcome, it's going to require an agreement that applies to the people who emit carbon. It seems self-evident, except therein lies the problem of Kyoto. The Kyoto Protocol, and I'm not one to make disparaging comments about the protocol. I simply point out that it has not fulfilled its promise. And the reason it hasn't is it was not ratified by the United States. And so right off the top, it did not apply to the largest carbon emitter in the world. The next treaty has to. Similarly, Kyoto, well, it did include countries such as China, India, and Brazil. It didn't have definitive targets for them that were binding. And so you're dealing with the lion's share of future emissions. And again, the Kyoto Protocol didn't restrict or reduce those emissions. And so this has been the problem with the Kyoto Protocol, is that it set out to be a treaty that would reduce carbon emissions, but it didn't apply to the major emitters of carbon. And so the key to a new single undertaking is that it needs to apply in a fulsome way and an equitable way to everybody who emits carbon. And this is a very strong part of the Canadian position and also the American position. The individual mitigation targets have been expressed in different ways by different countries. I think at the current time, what we have put forward as Canadians and what the Americans have put forward are essentially the same targets. There are some nuances, but the bill that is before the Senate in the United States calls for reductions of -20% by 2020 from a 2005 baseline. The Canadian bill calls for -20 by 2020 from a 2006 baseline. So they're very, very similar. The 2050 targets are also similar. As the Canadians talked about -60 to 70%, the United States circumstances are a little different. They've talked about -80%, as I recall. So again, these are sort of workable in terms of being stones thrown at each other. So that's I think what we need to do. But in terms of mitigation, on adaptation, we need to protect the most vulnerable states. We need to make sure that we build a framework to protect those least developed countries and most vulnerable states who are hurt first and most by climate change. And on finance, we need to, whether we can agree on quantum remains to be seen, but we need to define the structures that will apply under international treaty.
Right. You mentioned the 2006 baseline that Canada's looking at, and you said that the reason why 2006 was chosen was because it had best science in that year. Can you clarify and expand on what specifically constitutes as best science and why that was the year of best science?
I don't think I've ever said that it was the year of best science. 2006 was selected because that was the year that our government was elected. That was the year that we began taking serious concrete action on climate change. The previous government had signed the Kyoto Protocol and essentially done nothing. And 2006 represented, from our perspective, the commencement of serious efforts in Canada to deal with the problem, and that's the year that we have determined we will use as the base. The United States, for their reasons, has chosen 2005. As I recall, Australia has chosen 2005 as well, I believe. But essentially, there are many different approaches to the base year in these discussions.
Okay, thank you. For our next question.